In the late summer of 1940, the Battle of Britain raged in the skies above the English Channel. Below them, a young American named William R. Dunn sat in the cramped cockpit of a de Havilland Tiger Moth, learning the fundamentals of flight. The fabric-covered biplane was a far cry from the sleek fighters he hoped to fly, its wooden propeller and wire-braced wings demanding constant attention from any pilot who climbed aboard. During one training flight near the coast, the engine coughed and died, the propeller windmilling to a stop. Dunn had no choice but to find a field below and set the fragile machine down in a forced landing before the engine seized completely. He walked away without a scratch, and within weeks he had earned his wings and received orders that would change everything. Assignment to Number 71 Squadron, the first all-American Eagle Squadron of the Royal Air Force. By October of 1940, Dunn had transitioned from the open cockpit of the Tiger Moth to the 8-gun punch of the Hawker Hurricane, a frontline fighter that was the backbone of Britain's air defenses. His first scrambles came with little warning. A telephone ringing in the dispersal hut, pilots sprinting across the grass, and the roar of 12-cylinder Merlins coughing to life as they clawed for altitude over the channel. He learned to scan the horizon for the distinctive shapes of Messerschmitt 109s, to trust his instruments in the thick English cloud, and to feel the shudder of a near miss as enemy tracer rounds streaked past his wing. In those autumn days over the gray waters of the Channel, William R. Dunn crossed a line from student to fighter pilot, preparing for the trials that would make him America's first ace of the Second World War. The winter of 1940 gave way to spring, and Number 71 Squadron traded its Hurricanes for Supermarine Spitfire Mark II as Dunn climbed into the new fighter and felt the difference immediately. The Spitfire was lighter on the controls and faster through the climb. On April 26, 1941, he was patrolling over the English Channel when he spotted a Messerschmitt 109 flying below the cloud deck. He pushed the stick forward and closed the distance. The German pilot did not see him coming. Dunn lined up his gun sight and pressed the firing button, and 8 Browning machine guns hammered a stream of tracers into the enemy fuselage. The Me 109 rolled onto its back streaming smoke and plunged toward the sea. Dunn pulled up and scanned the sky, alone now, and riding the adrenaline of his first kill. Landing back at North Weald, Dunn filed his combat report and waited. The kill was not confirmed immediately, and that gnawed at him for weeks, but eventually the records caught up, and the victory was officially credited. He had drawn first blood, and the squadron began to take notice of the American pilot. Through July, the pace of operations grew relentless. Bomber escort missions and fighter sweeps over occupied France came almost daily. On the 20th, Dunn found himself in a running battle with a group of German fighters that stretched across the sky near the French coast. The engagement was a swirling chaos of rolling aircraft and tracer fire at high altitude. Dunn stuck with his section leader and fired at every enemy that crossed his sight, watching one fighter fall and then another. By the time the fight broke off, he had added to his tally of confirmed kills. His reputation spread through the squadron. The other pilots saw that Dunn was aggressive in a fight and steady under pressure. He was no longer a new boy learning the trade. He was becoming one of the most dependable fighters in 71 Squadron. August 27, 1941, began like any other mission. Dunn climbed into a Spitfire and took off for a fighter sweep over northern France. The sky was clear and visibility stretched for miles as the squadron crossed the coast near Lille. He spotted 2 Messerschmitt 109s below and dove to attack. Dunn lined up on the first and fired, watching it burst into flames. But the second 109 was already turning onto his tail, its cannons blazing. A shell tore through his cockpit and blew the front of his right foot away. A machine gun bullet grazed the back of his skull. His Spitfire was a wreck, but it was still flying. Blood soaked through his boot and trickled down the back of his neck. But Dunn kept pressure on the control stick and pointed the nose toward England. He crossed the channel on instinct, blacking out momentarily as the coast of Kent came into view. He set the damaged fighter down at Hawking Airfield, collapsing in the cockpit as ground crew pulled him from the wreckage. Medics loaded him into an ambulance and rushed him to the Royal Victoria Hospital at Folkestone, where he slipped in and out of consciousness as they cut away his flight suit. Dunn came awake in the Royal Victoria Hospital at Folkestone, groggy from painkillers and bandaged from head to toe. In the bed beside him lay a British Army officer named Captain Stevens, an ordnance officer whose face was swathed in bandages after a gunpowder explosion. His breathing was harsh and labored, and the room carried the sickly, sweet smell of burned flesh. When Dunn complained of hunger, the nurse explained that he had arrived without a ration card, and the civilian hospital could not feed him without one. Captain Stevens, barely conscious in his bandages, spoke in a muffled voice and offered his own card. Dunn thanked him quietly, unable to find the words for such a gift from a dying man. A few days later, intelligence officer J. Roland Robinson arrived with news. The combat reports had been analyzed, and Dunn's victories were now official. He had destroyed 6.5 enemy aircraft, making him the first American ace of the Second World War. Robinson added that one of the German pilots he had shot down on August 27th was a major ace himself, a decorated commander whose personal insignia was a red rooster. Captain Stevens, the burned officer who had offered Dunn his ration card, died that same night, and Dunn carried the quiet weight of that sacrifice with him for the rest of his life. Robinson himself went on to serve in Parliament and remained a steadfast friend of the Eagle squadrons long after the war. In late September of 1941, the doctors at the Royal Victoria Hospital decided Dunn was well enough to travel. They packed him onto a train bound for the seaside resort town of Torquay, where the Royal Air Force had converted a grand hotel into a convalescent hospital. Dunn arrived on crutches, his right leg still in a cast, and was assigned a roommate named John Barrow, a flight lieutenant with a broken back encased in a heavy plaster shell. The place was run more like a hotel than a hospital. It had a fully stocked bar and a swimming pool. The men who filled its rooms were the broken survivors of the Battle of Britain. A strange kind of camaraderie flourished at Torquay. Men with missing limbs, with faces rebuilt by the surgeons, with burns that would never fully heal. They all gathered in the bar each evening to celebrate anything they could invent. One afternoon, a group of patients decided to celebrate the discovery of Halley's Comet. They bought buckets of boiled lobsters, smuggled them up to the room, and used John Barrow's chest cast as an anvil to crack the shells. The feast ended when someone emptied the wastebasket out the window, showering the hospital commander and a visiting lady with lobster scraps. Dunn was confined to quarters, but the laughter that night was louder than any reprimand. In November 1941, Dunn returned to his squadron at North Weald, eager to rejoin the fight. But the homecoming was sour. His personal belongings, stuffed into a parachute bag and left on the dispersal hut floor, had been soaked through and ransacked. His best uniform was ruined. His socks and shirts were gone, and the squadron adjutant did not seem to care. Worse still, while Dunn lay in the hospital, 2 of his fellow pilots had been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. Both had fewer victories than he did. Dunn had been the first American ace, yet no medal had come his way, and the slight burned deep in the spring of 1942. While recovering in Canada and serving as an instructor, Dunn received a letter from his old friend in the squadron. The news was brief and brutal. Wendy, the young woman he had left behind in London, had been killed when a German bomb struck her apartment in Kensington. Dunn read the letter again and again, unable to accept what he was seeing. She was buried somewhere in a London cemetery, and he was an ocean away with no way to say goodbye. It would be 2 years before he could return to England. In 1944, while on leave from the 406 Fighter Group, Dunn took a train into London and found the quiet cemetery where Wendy was buried. He placed a small wreath of flowers on her grave and said a prayer. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a red paper poppy, the same one he had picked up in 1940 from the grave of the unknown soldier at Westminster Abbey. He knelt down, scooped out a little earth beside her headstone, and buried the poppy there in the soil. He left the cemetery knowing that a part of him would stay buried there with her. By May of 1942, Dunn had put the disappointment behind him and made a decision about his future. He married a young woman named Martha Alton Mook in a small church in Picton, Ontario, and the reception was held at the RAF station mess. The honeymoon in Toronto was brief but happy. Soon after, Dunn was posted to an operational training unit at Bagotville, Quebec, where he taught inexperienced Canadian pilots how to fly Hurricane fighters and survive in combat. He was doing honest work, training the next wave of men who would go into battle, but he knew in his bones that his own war was not yet finished. By early 1943, the pressure from Washington had become impossible to ignore. The United States Inter-Allied Personnel Board was demanding that all Americans serving in the British and Canadian Armed Forces transfer to the U.S. Army Air Corps. The letter Dunn received from the War Department was polite but firm. He would be given equal rank and transferred immediately. Dunn had no desire to leave the RAF. He had fought alongside the British for nearly 3 years, and he respected the men in the service. But his wife was pleased with the offer, and the American pay was far better than anything the British could provide. On June 15, 1943, Dunn formally transferred out of the Royal Air Force and into the United States Army Air Corps. The man who had been a squadron leader in the RAF, commanding men in combat, was mustered in as a first lieutenant. He drove down to Washington, walked into the office of Major General Guy V. Henry, and demanded an explanation. The old cavalry general laughed at his bluntness and handed him a promotion to captain on the spot. "You may be able to cuss at an old major general," Henry told him, "but be damn careful how you address some of our young 90-day wonder majors." Just 8 days after his transfer, his son Gerald Roy Dunn was born in Picton, Ontario. Dunn had traded one uniform for another, but the fight was the same. He was going back to the war. In March of 1944, William R. Dunn reported to the 406th Fighter Group at Ashford Airfield in Kent. He was now a captain in the United States Army Air Corps, assigned to fly the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The aircraft was a massive machine, a single-engine fighter that carried 850 caliber machine guns and could haul a bomb load that would have shamed a medium bomber. Dunn climbed into his assigned Thunderbolt for the first time and felt the sheer weight of the thing beneath him. It was not a Spitfire, but it was built to survive. Before leaving the United States, Dunn's wife Martha had given him a small calico dog named Poncho. Dunn strapped the little cloth mascot to the back of his flying helmet, where it would ride on every mission he flew. The 406 spent its first weeks in England in final operational training, flying from a tent camp beside a steel runway. Dunn's crew chief, Technical Sergeant Henry Jones, was a full-blooded Cherokee from Oklahoma. When Chief Jones said the aircraft was ready, it was ready, and the two men developed a bond of trust that would carry Dunn through the months ahead. On the morning of May 14, 1944, Dunn sat in his Thunderbolt at the head of the runway, loaded with two 500-pound bombs and 10 rockets. The mission was a dive-bombing attack on a railway marshalling yard in northern France. As the aircraft ahead of him took off, a bomb broke loose from its brackets and fell onto the steel runway planks. Dunn's landing gear rolled directly over the fallen bomb. The explosion ripped his Thunderbolt in half, just behind the cockpit. Dunn was hurled from the aircraft, his face and left eye cut to ribbons by shattered plexiglass. He landed hard on the runway, alive but bleeding. Dunn spent 2 days in the infirmary while doctors stitched his face back together. The bomb had cost him a favorite aircraft, but not his nerve. A new Thunderbolt arrived, a P-47 D-25 with a bubble canopy and bare metal finish. Its engine cowling bore a cartoon of a raunchy pilot covering his rear end with a steel helmet, and below it the words, "Posterius ferus," Latin for iron ass. Dunn laughed when he saw it. The name stuck, and the aircraft became his personal warhorse for the months of combat to come. June 6, 1944 began in darkness and rain. Dunn was awakened by the sound of thousands of aircraft engines overhead. He reported to group operations to find the commander, Colonel Anthony V. Grosetta, and the operations staff already at work. The teletype was chattering out the fragmentary order for Operation Overlord. The invasion of Europe had begun. Dunn was ordered to lead the first mission of the day, a fighter sweep over the Normandy beaches. At 4:30 in the morning, with rain still falling and cloud cover thick to 15,000 feet, Dunn led his squadron off the runway and into the sky. Climbing through the overcast was a white-knuckle affair. 60 Thunderbolts rose through the murk, each pilot flying on instruments, trusting the man on his wing not to drift. When they broke out above the clouds, the sight stopped Dunn cold. The English Channel was packed with ships, thousands of them, stretching from horizon to horizon, fighter aircraft filled the sky in every direction, all marked with the black and white invasion stripes painted on overnight. Dunn led his formation to their assigned patrol station and circled above the beaches. No German fighters rose to challenge them. The Luftwaffe was simply overwhelmed by the sheer mass of Allied air power. In the weeks after D-Day, the 406th moved to a primitive airfield in Normandy, a strip of chicken wire and tar paper laid across a French farm field. The group flew close air support missions almost daily, bombing and strafing German positions just ahead of the advancing infantry. Dunn learned the rhythms of ground attack, the hard dive through flak, the split-second release of bombs, the desperate pull-up at treetop height. The Thunderbolt took punishment that would have crippled any other fighter and kept flying. On August 1st, 1944, the 406th found a target that would make history. Flying armed reconnaissance south of the Loire River, Dunn and his squadron spotted a German armored column stretched over 15 miles of road. Tanks, trucks, half-tracks, and artillery pieces packed the highway, a full army group moving to strike General Patton's exposed flank. The 406th hit that column with every weapon they carried, bomb after bomb, rocket after rocket, strafing run after strafing run. By the end of the day, the road was a graveyard of burning steel. The German general in command asked to surrender, but only to the Air Force unit that had destroyed his army. Colonel Grossetto accepted the surrender at a bridge over the Loire. The 406th received a distinguished unit citation for the action. For Dunn, it was a strange kind of victory. Grinding armored columns into scrap from the air was a far cry from dogfighting over the Channel in a Spitfire. But the war was changing, and the Thunderbolt was the right tool for the job. The group pressed on, flying mission after mission, hammering German supply lines, airfields, and troop concentrations across France. By late August, the Wehrmacht was in full retreat, and the 406th was hunting them day and night. On August 25, 1944, 3 Thunderbolts peeled off toward the harbor at Brest. Dunn led the flight, and below them they spotted German troopships attempting to evacuate soldiers by sea. The flak was intense, heavy guns and automatic weapons throwing a curtain of steel over the harbor. One Thunderbolt from another group was already down in the water, its pilot bobbing in the harbor without a life vest. Another P-47 pilot flew low and slow through the flak to drop his own Mae West to the man in the water. It was a brave act, and Dunn and his wingmen poured suppressing fire on the German gunners to give him cover. Dunn selected a 4,000-ton troopship anchored in a small bay below the city. Twice he tried low-level attacks, and twice the flak drove him off. He climbed to 4,000 feet, shoved the throttle forward, and dove flat out. The Thunderbolt screamed down through the gunfire, and he leveled out just above the water and salvoed his rockets. 4 of them struck the ship dead center, exploding inside the hull. 2 more hit below the waterline. Dunn pulled up so low that he collided with the ship's rigging as he passed over the deck. The troopship began to sink. Dunn's Thunderbolt took 18 hits from the German flak batteries, but the rugged fighter carried him home. For the action at Brest, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the first major American decoration of his career. After years of watching others receive honors, after the snub at North Weald, after the long hospital stays and the slow return to combat, the recognition carried real weight. He flew back to base with poncho still strapped to his helmet and a crew chief who had already patched up the holes. By October of 1944, Dunn had flown more than 100 combat missions in the European theater. His tour was complete. He would be taken off operations and reassigned. Dunn was tired. The months of dive bombing, strafing, and flak had worn deep grooves in his nerves. He had been shot down once, shot up several times, and wounded 4 times over the course of his service. The odds were catching up, and everyone knew it. Dunn reviewed his combat record before he left. In air-to-air fighting, he had destroyed 8.5 enemy aircraft confirmed, with additional probables and damaged. On the ground, he had destroyed 12 more. He had sunk a troopship, wrecked over 100 enemy vehicles, and flown missions from the Channel coast to the Loire Valley. The record was solid. The work was done. He packed his gear, said goodbye to the pilots of the 406th, and boarded a transport for the United States. He left behind a group that had earned a reputation as one of the hardest-hitting fighter units in Europe. The 406th had destroyed nearly 60 enemy aircraft in the air and dozens more on the ground. smashed railway yards, blown up bridges, and burned German columns off the map. Dunn carried with him a new uniform, a faded cloth dog, and the knowledge that he had done what he set out to do. He survived, and he would soon be headed back to fight again. Dunn arrived back in the United States to a quiet homecoming. He had just a brief leave before a new set of orders arrived. In March of 1945, Dunn reported to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, for the Command and General Staff School, a 3-month course compressed from a year of peacetime study. He found the curriculum outdated, teaching tactics from an earlier war, but he passed near the top of his class. Then came his assignment, the China-Burma-India Theater, a sprawling, disorganized command where the war against Japan was still grinding on. When he finally returned home in early 1947, his marriage to Martha Alton Mook did not survive the long years of separation, and the couple divorced that same year. Dunn flew across the Atlantic and over the Himalayas to Kunming, China. The heat and humidity hit him like a wall. He was made deputy base commander at Lushen, a supply hub on the Yangtze River. His stepfather, Roy Harding, now a colonel commanding an air service group in Burma, sent a C-47 loaded with cases of American beer to Lushen, a rare luxury. Dunn flew a few combat missions in P-51s with the 23rd Fighter Group, strafing Japanese ground targets, but most of his work was administrative. He helped coordinate the flow of fuel and supplies over the hump, keeping the 14th Air Force in the fight. Roy Harding survived the war and returned to his family in Arizona. In August of 1945, the atomic bombs ended the war. Dunn was assigned as commander of Liuqiao Air Base, a former Japanese field in southern China. His job now was to help airlift the Chinese 94th Army to Shanghai for occupation duty. C-54 transports arrived by the dozen, and for 2 weeks they loaded Chinese soldiers aboard day and night, 25,000 men in total. The operation went off without a hitch, and Dunn received a commendation from Lieutenant General George Stratemeyer for his work. With the war over, Dunn expected to go home. Instead, he was ordered to stay in China as an advisor to the Chinese Nationalist Air Force. He was assigned to the 4th Fighter Group at Peking, flying a polished P-51 with nationalist markings. The civil war between Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists and Mao Zedong's communists had begun, and Dunn's job was to train and lead Chinese pilots in close air support missions. He flew dozens of sorties against communist positions, strafing columns and supply routes. The work was dangerous. He once drove through a roadblock manned by communist troops, firing his pistol as he crashed through. In January of 1947, the United States withdrew its advisors from China. Dunn boarded a war-weary C-54 and flew home. He had served overseas for more than 7 years straight, fighting in 2 wars. Back in the States, he met a young woman named Evelyn Cecilia Rowley, a blonde with a warm smile. They married in September of 1947. Dunn took assignments with the Air National Guard and later as an advisor to the Imperial Iranian Air Force, training pilots on Hurricanes and Thunderbolts. But the peacetime Air Force was no place for a man who had been a squadron leader at 25. The promotion stopped coming, and he was passed over for regular captain. In 1949, Dunn was discharged from the regular Air Force. He refused to leave aviation behind. He enlisted as a technical sergeant and served for years as a warrant officer, working in war plans and intelligence. He spent tours in Brazil, Oklahoma, Okinawa, and Hawaii. Through it all, he kept the little calico dog named Pancho strapped to his flying gear, the same mascot his first wife had given him in 1944. Pancho flew with him on every mission, a silent witness to 2 decades of service. In 1967, Dunn was assigned to Saigon, South Vietnam, as a tactical weapons officer for the 7th Air Force. He was 52 years old, a chief warrant officer testing new infrared sensors and rocket tactics against the Viet Cong. He flew over 60 missions as an observer in A-1s, F-4s, and AC-130 gunships. The war was frustrating, restricted by politicians 10,000 miles away, but Dunn did his job, developing methods to burn out enemy supply caches and interdict river traffic on the Mekong. On the night of January 31, 1968, the Tet Offensive exploded across South Vietnam. Dunn was at his billet in Saigon when Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops overran the area. His BOQ held 60 unarmed American officers and 5 Red Cross workers. Dunn grabbed a pistol and a flak jacket, slipped out the gate, and commandeered 2 trucks from the airbase. Under fire, he loaded the entire group and drove them to safety. For that action, he was awarded a Bronze Star. One newspaper called him an aging hero. He was 52 and he had just led his last combat rescue. Dunn returned to the United States in 1968 and served at Aerospace Defense Command headquarters in Colorado Springs. In 1973, after 38 years of service in 3 nations, he retired as a lieutenant colonel at the ceremony. The British Air Attaché presented him with a framed copy of his combat report from 27 August 1941, the day he became America's first ace of the Second World War. The commander of Air Defense Command pinned the Legion of Merit on his chest. Poncho, now battered and faded, sat on a table beside him. Colonel Grosetta, who had led the 406th through the Normandy breakout and the destruction of the German armored column at the Loire, survived the war and went on to become a brigadier general in the United States Air Force. The men he flew with, the burned captain who gave him a ration card, the RAF pilots at Torquay, the Eagle Squadron comrades killed before they turned 20, were all gone. He was the last of something that would never come again. He settled quietly in Colorado Springs with his wife Evelyn. When asked about the aircraft he flew, he would say the Spitfire was the finest fighter ever built, the Thunderbolt the toughest, and the Mustang the longest-legged. But the real secret, he knew, was not the machine. It was the pilot's will to close with the enemy and shoot first. William R. Dunn, the combat-hardened fighter pilot who had survived 3 wars, had done exactly that, and in doing so, wrote his name into the first page of America's air combat history. If you have a family story from World War II, a memory passed down from a father or grandfather who served, we would love to hear it in the comments. And if you value keeping these stories alive, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It helps us continue telling the histories that deserve to be remembered. Thank you for listening.